Nearly 20 years ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin described the peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And for decades, he's worked incessantly to revive the repressive empire built by Stalin, including by redrawing European borders by force. Back in 2008, he sent the Russian military to bring Georgia, a sovereign democracy, to heel. His forces occupy parts of that country right up to today. And precisely 10 years ago today, Putin launched a military invasion into Ukraine to seize Crimea and the Donbass region. Of course, today isn't an anniversary of a settled event in the past. It's a mile marker in a campaign of subjugation, brutality, and conquest that remains very much alive. Over the past 10 years, Putin's invasion has grown from an initial incursion by little green men to a massive ground campaign to seize all of Ukraine. But as Russian aggression escalated, two things remain the same. First, the incredible resolve of the Ukrainian people to defend their sovereignty. And second, the tendency of Western partners capable of supporting Ukraine's defense to hesitate instead. Think about America's own behavior back in 2014. President Obama was 6 years removed from a promise to reset relations with Russia, and a little more than a year removed from mocking his opponent on the presidential debate stage for warning of the threat posed by Putin. As he put it smugly to our colleague, my opponent, Romney, the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back. That same year, then Vice President Biden said our colleague from Utah was, quote, mired in a Cold War mindset. Well, of course, the Obama-Biden administration didn't just scoff at realism on Russia. They assiduously avoided it. When Ukraine's pro-Western democratic leaders faced an incursion by highly trained Russian troops, they begged for lethal weapons to defend their sovereign territory. But the Obama-Biden administration worried about escalation and sent non-lethal supplies like blankets and MREs instead. The next year, the West's collective failure to support Ukraine militarily or impose meaningful costs on Russia resulted in ceasefire agreements that at best would have frozen the conflict in place had Putin actually respected them. Even as the next administration moved to provide lethal assistance and training for Ukraine and begin the process of rebuilding our own military strength, too few European allies were taking Russian aggression or their own pledges to increase defense spending after Putin's 2014 invasion seriously enough. Unfortunately, President Biden compounded the problems he had helped sow back when he was vice president. From a disastrous, credibility-shredding withdrawal from Afghanistan to his costly refusal to steer European allies away from reliance on Russia, especially Russian energy, it's not a mystery why Putin was undeterred. The weakness and indecision that defined the Obama-Biden administration's response to Putin's 2014 invasion have actually echoed in the Biden-Harris administration's response to his 2022 escalation. For months, as Russian forces massed on Ukraine's borders, and for months, as their brutal campaign got underway, the Biden White House mostly managed to deter itself from equipping Ukraine at the speed of relevance. This is not to say that Western allies and partners aren't making historic investments in deterring common threats. The free world is indeed finally waking up. In the last 2 years, NATO allies have spent more than $120 billion on cutting-edge U.S. weapons and capabilities while also making historic investments in their own defense industrial capacity. And just think of the lessons Russian aggression is teaching about the interconnected nature of the threats that we face. Consider how unwaveringly our allies in the Indo-Pacific have supported Ukraine's fight, both in word and in deed. As Taiwan's foreign minister put it over the weekend on the 2-year anniversary of the 2022 escalation, here's what he said: Ukraine's resistance was, quote, showing us what fighting spirit is and passing it on to Taiwan. Or take the encouraging news just yesterday that Sweden is now finally poised to become the newest member of the Transatlantic Alliance. I visited Stockholm and Helsinki in a show of solidarity last March, when their parliaments voted overwhelmingly in favor of joining NATO. There's just no question that Sweden and Finland, joining the most successful military alliance in human history, will further contribute advanced capabilities to our collective security and make the West and America safer. Across the world, Americans, allies, and partners have drawn sobering lessons from the latest chapter of Russian aggression in Ukraine. But we have yet to learn some of the same lessons ourselves. It's time to recognize how passivity, half measures, and delay brought the West to this particular moment. And when they take us, if we don't reject them and chart a new course. We should reflect on the mistakes of the Obama-Biden administration, the failure to respond forcefully to aggression, and we should resolve not to make those same mistakes ourselves. For 10 years, our adversary has showed us by his actions that Russia's appetite for conquest grows with the eating. We can no longer afford to pretend otherwise.